We are glad you chose to start your day with us. I know there's a few folks still coming in. I heard the traffic is really, really bad out there. So I do anticipate some more guests joining us this morning. Idaho Business Review editor Mark Lutz has lined up an excellent panel for today's discussion, and you will be introduced to them momentarily. But first, the breakfast series would not be possible without the support of our 2025 program sponsors. I'd like to recognize our series presenting sponsor, Hawley Troxell. Hawley Troxell is Idaho's premier law firm. Let's give them a round of applause. I'd also like to thank our supporting sponsors, Bank of America and the Grove Hotel. Thank you for your support. Today we are hosting a breakfast series at Boise Center because there are exciting plans for the Grove Hotel this year. The Grove Hotel first opened its doors in 1997, nearly 30 years ago. As the line goes, I think it's aging gracefully, wouldn't you say? I need to know their secret. And that's because it is well taken care of. After a recent renovation to the lobby and event space in 2018, management has decided it is time to completely renovate 250 guest rooms and update all public spaces in the beautiful hotel. That is what's impacting us from being there today. So we're super excited for the renovation, and I know that is something the Boise Center is not unfamiliar with because I think they're on a 5-year cycle here. It's crazy, but there's a lot of traffic in the open spaces and hospitality space in Boise, which is a good thing. So this is quite an undertaking for the Grove Hotel, and we are just thrilled that that is happening, and it's a beautiful icon for Boise. So I'd like to show appreciation to the Boise Center for accommodating our event during the Grove Hotel renovations. Let's give Boise Center a round of applause. And then these are just some slides. There's the guest rooms there. So that is quite an undertaking. And it's high all the year. So there's that. Okay. Before I turn it over to editor Mark Lutz, I want to inform you that today's event is being recorded by videographer Mike DiDonato. Mike is with Better Business Bureau, and we are grateful to have their support. So thank you so much. Now, I'd like to welcome Idaho Business Review editor Mark Lutz to introduce our panel this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all here this morning. Did everyone get enough carbs? Carbs and coffee, that's what we should start calling this. This was a fun one to pull together. We've had the discussion about having all the right panelists, and we always try to get the best people up here, the folks with a good amount of knowledge that can speak well to all of the different topics. And one of the things that bringing this panel together taught me is you just have to be open and go with the flow. You never know what to expect. I had the opportunity yesterday, and we had our editorial meeting. We have it on Wednesday afternoons. And one of the comments that I made was after that meeting, I was going to interview someone who happened to be a lawyer. And I said, I love interviewing lawyers. You ask one simple question, and they never shut up. Love to talk, and it makes it so much easier. This goes back to my point. I think I interviewed one of the very few lawyers in the world who said, just enough. And he didn't want to say anything else. Man of few words is what I'm getting at. So it made my job a little bit more difficult. And it reminded me, again, you just have to be open. You never know what to expect. That's the same with this year's legislative session. I don't know if any of you had a chance to look at the bills that were being proposed. If you went to the website and took a look, I started scrolling down, okay, see some of the different ones that are taking effect or that are being discussed. And I kept scrolling, and I kept scrolling, and all of a sudden the song was in my head, scrolling, 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 keep the webpage scrolling. It just wouldn't stop. I don't know if I ever got to the bottom. But we were able to discuss a lot of what happened this year in our initial meetings for this panel, and we pulled it all together. So I think you're going to be very, very pleased with what everybody has to say today. We have today with us Stephanie Camarilla, owner of Molly Maid and of Boise and Treasure Valley. We have Ken Day, the Director of Government and Public Affairs for J.R. Simplot and Company. We have Bobby Joel Muehlman, CEO and President of the Boise Metro Chamber of Commerce. And we have Corey Serber, the Director of State Advocacy for St. Alphonsus and Trinity Health. And our moderator today is supplied always from Holly Troxel, and he is the co-managing partner, Tom Mortel. Let's have a round of applause for him, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Mark. It's my pleasure to be here with you today. This legislative session, and I have the opportunity to chair the Chamber's Policy Committee. And what we're tasked with by the Chamber is to look at every piece of legislation that affects businesses in the Treasure Valley, and then to make a decision on what the Chamber's position will be on that legislation. And so we meet every Wednesday during the legislative session and actually read and review every bill that could impact our Chamber members, large and small, and we have an opportunity then to take positions on that. I think the way I would characterize this legislative session, and I'm just an observer from the outside, I'm not a lobbyist, I don't directly advocate for anything, but I do spend a fair amount of time with it. The term is often said making sausage be made, and all the things that go into making sausage. And typically that sausage is made up of chunks of meat from deceased animals. I would say that some limbs got too close to the grinder, and maybe people had sausage made out of parts of their hands and maybe their arms this session. So I know that's a harsh analogy, but I think that it's appropriate. So we're going to start by talking about some general questions about this legislative session, and then we're going to ask the panelists some specific questions about their industry. I do have the privilege of working closely with three of these panel members on the Chamber Policy Committee, Corey, Ken, and Bobby Joe as the CEO of the Chamber. I'm very proud of the legislative efforts that we've made as a Chamber and the positions and advocacy efforts we've made on behalf of Idaho's businesses. Idaho's small businesses really have no legislative voice in a congregated, meaningful way other than the Chamber, and we love the fact that we can go to bat for those folks. So let's start off with Stephanie. Tell us some ways, if you can identify any, where this year's legislative session has actually helped small business.
That's great. Well, thank you. And it's great to be here amongst such a distinguished group. And, I really am looking at this session from a small business perspective, and that's the role that I play. It was more of the same of what we've come to expect in Idaho, right? We've got a balanced budget, tax relief, and then the reduction of red tape. From a small business perspective, we're really different than the group that I'm sitting next to, because often it's just the owner. We don't have an HR department. We don't have a legal team. We just have one person trying to serve their customers and keep their doors open. And so often we can kind of get left behind in knowing about legislation that can really affect our employees and our bottom line. So that's what drove me to become a part of NFIB, which is the National Federation of Independent Businesses. And Susie Budge is here with us today. She's our state representative. But this has been just a fabulous group, boots on the ground, both at the state level and the federal level, keeping us up to date on what's going on. So in general, I was just so pleased to see the governor return $400 million to us through different forms of tax relief. And I wanted to give a real world example of that. So I own a house cleaning company, a very simple company. And the other day I was at the office, and a house cleaner comes back from a busy day, and she flops down on the chair and she's like, oh my gosh, I just got my tax refund and I'm over the moon excited. I got $2,000 back. And she said, I'm going to use this money to fix my car and to pay down debt. And, I smiled inside and I thought, we can talk about legislation, but this is really what matters. It's returning that money to people so they can take care of what's important in their lives. So,
Thank you. Appreciate that answer. Ken, what are some things that you've watched and you followed this session and bills that have had the biggest impact on the agricultural industry and companies such as Simplot?
Okay. I'll echo what Stephanie said about tax reform. Obviously, that's always a positive. I think we're down to 5.3% for business tax, which improves our ranking. I think before we were 29th or 30th in the U.S. in terms of business taxes, so that's going to put us in the upper tier, hopefully. So that's always a help. The other thing that, in addition to tax reform, childcare has been a big issue. So I'm the chair of the Idaho Association for Commerce and Industry, and that's an effort we've been pushing for a number of years. So there's more money now for childcare because that's a big issue for employees trying to find childcare. It's not cheap. It's hard to find. So the more money we can put into that, I think we'll have about $45 million now over 3 years, if I remember correctly. And then this is a little bit of inside baseball, but we were very supportive of the effort at the DEQ to bring more money into that department, improve the salaries for the DEQ folks, and maybe hire some more folks. Because as a big company, so much of what we do relies on getting the permits in time and being able to get our projects off the line. And the DEQ for a number of years has been understaffed and unfortunately very underpaid. The DEQ folks were not at a level where they needed to be. So we were successful in getting some more funding into DEQ, which hopefully helps the permitting process and move things along a little quicker. And then, of course, I think we'll all agree that from a business perspective, the big one we were watching this year, both from Simplot and on IACI and others, was the launch program. We got another year of funding in the launch program. Obviously, finding employees, and I think we'll probably talk about this in a little more detail moving forward, but finding employees is always a challenge, and the launch invest in Idaho kids to keep them in Idaho and get them the jobs that businesses like Simplot and other companies need. So launch was a big one as well. I guess we can have the discussion back to the tax. We'll probably talk about, did we cut too deep on taxes? We can have that discussion, but anytime we can cut taxes is a positive across the board.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Bobby Joe, what are you seeing so far as bills that are going to impact chamber members and the business community as a whole? Give us an idea of what you're viewing the breadth of that work to be.
Thanks, Tom. So I think one of the things that we watched really closely this legislative session is we are seeing an anti-growth sentiment right now. And in the Treasure Valley, that impacts us the most as we are seeing the growth here. And so I think what we saw and watched a lot of and have concerns about is some of the bills that they're pushing it back against growth, which you can understand, right? Housing prices they're unattainable right now. People reject some of the things that are happening because of growth. And so, we saw bills, if it were to take away economic incentive tools that were created for a purpose, because we are seeing so much growth here and natural things. And so, being concerned of, taking away some of those tools that we have, because where we are right now is very different than we were in 2008 or, and so I take where we are now as a better situation than, we were begging people to come, businesses to expand and grow here. And so I think from the policy committee, those were a lot of the things that we looked at. And for the most part, a lot of those didn't move, luckily. I think also, too, we saw some things that were concerning when it comes to, which I think Corey will talk about, but some of the things that really are tools that create the community and things that we want, which is a thriving healthcare system and education system and those sort of things. And so I think when we looked at it this year, we just saw a lot of things, if it was from, attack on the energy system, or if it was going after maybe some of the energy, the way we do energy here in the state, or if it was taking away some tools. I think those were things that we had to watch and manage, and lots of conversations of ensuring that we don't cut too deep on some of those things, because there will be a time when we wish we had those back. So I think that's a lot of what we watched this year from a chamber perspective.
So Corey, you and I both follow healthcare. You do it full time. I do it on our weekly calls that we had for the Idaho Hospital Association in talking about legislation, and we've both experienced some difficult things. So give us an idea of the bills and the efforts that passed this session, and maybe some of the things that didn't pass that maybe you're going to still be looking forward to addressing another session, again and again. Give us some ideas
That's the theme.
of what you faced.
Thanks, Tom. So I would say in health policy, it really was an overwhelming session in terms of just the volume of legislation, and they really fell into some overall themes, the first of which was Medicaid. A lot of concern on the part of legislators over growth in the Medicaid program and continued just displeasure over the fact that we are paying 10% of the cost as a state to cover the Medicaid expansion population, which is working poor. The reality is that population is the working poor. Most of them are, working a job or two or three, but they're in jobs that don't offer coverage, or they can't afford the premium to get that coverage. And we know that it's more cost effective for them to have access to primary care and, the necessary preventative measures, more cost effective to do that than to not have coverage for them and to have them delay care and end up with very, very serious health conditions that result in emergency room visits and hospitalizations that are very costly. But we kind of had a door number one, door number two, door number three situation with Medicaid this year. The first bill was kind of a shot over the bow. It was, we're going to repeal Medicaid expansion, which, as you'll recall, was passed by voter initiative. Almost 62% of the vote back in 2018 was passed by the citizens after the legislature did not act to do that for 6 or 7 years. They've been trying to find a way to repeal that. Following on the heels of that bill, there was door number two, which was a list of 11 conditions that had to be met by July of 2026. Or Medicaid expansion would be repealed. And several of them were conditions that could not be met based on just the language in the Affordable Care Act, federal rules around waivers that you can ask for. And so door number three that came along was a much broader approach at both reforming the entire Medicaid program and moving it into a comprehensive managed care plan that, insurance companies, some of whom could be the big national insurers, could come in and bid on managing the Medicaid population. So it included that's a monumental shift that will take years to implement. And it, for providers, these managed care plans, they don't really save states money. It just gets the monkey off of the legislature's back and onto an insurance company's back in terms of when there's delays, denials, that sort of thing. You can point to the managed care company. Also in that bill were a couple of the provisions that had been in the previous bill, waivers that they want to ask the federal government to do with the Medicaid expansion population, work requirements. And I think it's a mislabeling. It's not really work requirements, it's work reporting requirements. And the reason these haven't been approved by the federal government before is that, these waivers are intended to increase coverage. You can apply for waivers to do your Medicaid expansion a little differently, but it needs to expand coverage, not decrease it. And these work reporting requirements require enrollees to report on a very regular basis the hours they worked or volunteer service or other things that qualify as work. And people get procedurally disenrolled. It's not because they're not working. It's because they forget to do the paperwork or they misunderstand how to do the paperwork. Something goes wrong there and then they get disenrolled. So we have a very broad Medicaid reform situation coming at us. The second bucket is you would think, I thought mistakenly that COVID was in the rearview mirror, but it is back. This year in the legislature, I think we saw a number of legislators who were elected on a platform of wasn't it awful during COVID, the things that we had to do, and kind of it's easy to second guess in the rearview mirror. But we had everything from banning any mask mandates in the future, allowing ivermectin to be sold over the counter. That was like a last minute bill, and there was kind of a shoulder shrug because federal law determines what can be sold over the counter for human consumption. Medical freedom bill, conscience protections being broadened for healthcare, anybody in the healthcare space, very broad, even the payers. If anybody has a deeply held religious belief against participating or paying for a certain procedure, they would be able to decline to do that. That creates sort of an HR nightmare for for healthcare providers, because there'll have to be a discussion, and there's language that allows for us to ask the employee to document what are your deeply held religious beliefs and what procedures will that mean that you can't participate in. Beyond that, they restricted public health board duties. They're forming a COVID study committee that, I think it's probably too soon to do something like that, because it will turn out to be a witch hunt. And then what I think was really interesting was a resolution to not recognize President Biden's pardon of Dr. Fauci and open him up to be charged with state crimes in the state of Idaho. So that's kind of how far the COVID backlash went. Beyond that, there was a lot of discussion about medical education funding. Workforce in the healthcare sector is a really, it's a critical priority for us, and there was a lot of backlash against the current medical education partners that we have in the state. The seats that we have that are really the medical education institution backing that up is the University of Washington, and there was a preference to move away from that partnership and towards Utah. In the end, they ended up with a compromise that I think it doesn't definitely end that partnership with the University of Washington. It leaves it up to a committee. What I would say didn't pass that we're concerned that didn't advance is some corrections to the parental consent law that passed last year that was intended for one pretty narrow purpose, and that was a kid going to school and somehow getting gender-affirming care. It really was about a kid shouldn't be able to get counseling or medical care or whatever without their parents knowing. But the broad implications of that were a kid that's on a football team and they're on an away game and they break their leg. This really happened. Broke their leg, and because the language of the legislation says you can't treat that kid without parental consent unless there's a risk to their life, they couldn't treat the broken leg until they got a hold of the parents. So it's considerations for schools for behavioral health, the suicide hotline, and whether they can talk to youth or not. The other thing is just fixes to Idaho's abortion law. We've had a mass exodus of OBGYNs from the state due to the narrow language in the law, and there was some desire to get a maternal health exception, which is still, would create pretty narrow criteria, but would give OBGYNs a little more comfort that their job and their future might not be on the line when they're caring for a woman who's experiencing a miscarriage or something like that, and just being able to manage that.
Thanks, Corey.
Easy stuff.
And as I'm checking off the list of all the things you could have said that didn't about healthcare, it was a challenging session for healthcare. I've characterized it as this in the past, that those who advocate on behalf of our healthcare providers in the past have done a good job of fending off a lot of bills that had the potential to do real damage to our healthcare system. This was the first session now in the recent past where there has been real damage done to our healthcare system. And so that's going to be the subject of future discussions. Let's talk about the volume of legislation. I think that someone calculated that there were 10 miles worth of bills introduced this year. Some very junior members of the legislature introduced so many bills they had a hard time keeping track of everything they were trying to advocate for. What's the danger of having just a mountain of legislation all coming down on these folks at the same time? And I don't know who wants to start with that. Maybe we'll start with you, Ken.
Well, I think obviously some good bills get lost in the shuffle, and as we saw late in the session, you have the bill like the ivermectin bill that just appeared out of nowhere, and I kind of joked that the Senate Democrats voted against it. By the time it hit the House, they voted for it. I think they were just tired and wanted to go home. So, so I did some numbers just on terms of the amount of bills that were introduced. We had over 1,000 pieces of legislation drafted, about 700, a little over 700 introduced, and 342 bills passed. And then that's 82 resolutions, 54 being adopted. That's an incredible level of bills.
That's nothing like what it's been in the past.
No, nothing like it's been in the past. And I don't want to pick on the Republican majority, but everyone likes to beat up on Washington and Oregon. They produce thousands of bills, but I think the Republicans are going to end up giving those states a run for the money if they keep it up. And to your point, there were a couple legislators that had several hundred bills just themselves. So you get good bills get lost in the shuffle. Things get rushed through. And as we know, they did not finish on time. They always pick a sine die date, and that's apparently one they just as a recommended date, but I think they were 2 weeks past that. So, I mean, that's the problem. You got to prioritize. You have a limited amount of time, and you need to prioritize what bills are best for Idaho. And then go back to the fundamentals of why you're a legislature. What are you there for, really? And we saw a lot of personal, really, bills, a lot of called red meat bills, cultural bills, all kinds of those things coming through, which is not beneficial for the overall health of Idaho, in my opinion.
So Bobby Joe, I'll extend this question a little bit to you. What happens to the thoughtful, deliberative hearing process that we've kind of become accustomed to as part of our legislative process when everybody is sinking under the volume of the bills to be considered?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw this session is it's changed. The process has changed. I think what you're seeing is we have a much more active legislature. They're coming in the first week of session, and they already have a lot of these bills drafted. And so it's just changing the process, and it's hard, right, at times, right, to keep up with all of them. And so I think those are things that we all have to figure out is how can we be more engaged in the interim and be more aware of what these bills are so when they do come in such a big amount, because I don't think that's going to change. I think that's the new norm. I think you have a lot of think tanks out there, and that's their process, is they're connecting with legislators at conferences, so on and so forth, and they're, talking to them about these proposals. And so it's something that we have to be able to adapt to and find a way to better manage. I think, unfortunately, when you have that many bills, and as Ken said, you get to the end of a session, right, a bill that typically would take a few weeks to make it through the process, makes it through the process in a couple days, and that makes it hard, right? That makes it hard for the public to have the time that they need to participate. It makes it hard for industry to participate. And so those become real challenges, and I think we're seeing more and more of those bills pop up at the end of the session. And the process that would typically take weeks is a 1 to 2 day process, and it makes it hard for everyone to participate when you move that quickly.
Stephanie, give us our
Yeah,
perspective
well, I
on
just
small
wanted
business.
to tag along to a point that Corey made, which is often when we get this volume of legislation and it's coming so quickly, we can end up with the idea of unintended consequences, which I think you pointed to. So bills that may be designed, in a benevolent way with a certain purpose actually end up having these kind of crazy because it's just there's not been the time to vet and to think through those consequences.
Yeah. And I would sort of just chime in that I think part of this is strategic. It's flood the zone with so much that, industries have to pick and choose where they're going to prioritize their time, their political capital, they really have to pick and choose. And in healthcare, that was definitely the case. I was getting a lot of outreach from, our leaders within St. Alphonsus saying, are you aware of this bill? And that's horrible. And that, that has implications and whatnot. And I would have to sort of empower them to reach out because we needed to keep focused on the big items. But I think part of what's driving the volume, to Bobby Joe's point, is, you've got these out-of-state interests who, meet up with some of our newly elected legislators in particular. They hand them a bunch of model legislation that they want passed in all the states and like, go get this passed. And then when it gets introduced, they haven't yet, the process used to be a committee chair might ask, is this bill ripe? Have they gone out to the industry to see what would be the implications of this? Do we need to revamp it at all? That sort of thing. And we saw that, shortcutted straight to, we just want to pass this. The industry didn't even know about it before it was introduced. We tried to get amendments in. They might not get accepted or even recognized. And so that's been really challenging.
Let's move on to. I think we had at least one mention of launch. There are many in the business community that believes the governor's launch program is a long-term game changer, actually changing the system for how we educate young people in Idaho, a way to address workforce shortages and to help these young people find careers in in-demand areas. So I want to talk a little bit further about that. The Boise Metro Chamber has been a champion of the governor's launch program from the beginning, as have many of our members. Bobby Joe, would you give us some more details about launch and what it entails and why it's the number one priority for the chamber?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I think every business knows your most precious resource is the people. Without the people, none of us are going to be successful. And so from a business perspective, making those investments in education to ensure you have that talent pipeline is critical. And I think that's why from a chamber perspective, we've always been heavily supportive and engaged. And I think what Launch has showed, it's just now in the second round of kids, is enrollment numbers are up at our institutions. I mean, it's working. And having that talent pipeline, making those investments, it's a forward-thinking thing to do. And those are things I think from a business perspective that creates certainty. That creates, people are going to know that as a state, we're investing in education. We're investing in having our kids stay here to fill those jobs that we're going to need. That just creates certainty, and it's the right thing to do. And I think that's why you've seen the business community rally around it. So we were really excited to see it get funded again this year. It's a challenge. I think it's going to be a fight every year to get it funded. So hopefully one of these years we can get it continuously appropriated. But I just think it's one of those investments that it's going to continue to pay dividends. And in a short period of time, it's already showing that it's working by those increased enrollment numbers in our institutions.
Thank you. And that really, I can't emphasize too much about what a great program that's been. A little bit on the flip side of the benefits to that, I think there are some observers, and Ken, I want you to address this. You've been around the State House for so many years. Has it given the launch program and its effectiveness and the governor's desire to always have it there, given the rest of the legislature an opportunity to hold him hostage on some issues, things he may not otherwise support or may want to veto?
I
They dangle launch and say,
I think that was the fear going into this session. I think some of us thought they might hold the funding hostage. They didn't. They approved the funding, but we did see a bill not too long after that where they wanted to change the structure of launch toward the last minute of this session, where they wanted to. Right now, the Workforce Development Council determines the in-demand careers, which, from my opinion and for business's opinion, that's who should be doing it. Those are the folks that work for the companies and know what the careers they need. They wanted to make a move to change that, to take away that authority from the Workforce Development Council and put it into the authority of the legislature, do a legislative committee of Republicans and Democrats who make that decision. They also wanted to limit it to only 2-year trade schools as opposed to 4-year schools. So we did see a challenge to it, but it was last minute, but I think we'll continue to see that going forward. But to echo Bobby Joe's point, the program's been wildly successful. The amount of kids who are enrolling in it continues to increase. And from a business perspective, we want to recruit kids here. I mean, it's a whole lot easier to recruit kids here for our jobs and our factories and our operations than it is to bring people from outside Idaho. We all know how difficult it is to recruit employees from outside Idaho. We got a lot of things going against us, whether it's some healthcare issues, whether it's housing is through the roof. It's incredibly hard to find housing. You got transportation constraints. So the more we can recruit internally, I think the better we're going to be. So that's obviously one that we want to continue to focus on. And we want to keep that control, in my mind, in the hands of the business folks that are creating those jobs. And there was one statistic that came out when the governor was talking about some of the benefits of launch. And I think it was, if I got it written down here correctly, that they had a 23% increase of students who got launched that had GPAs of around 2.7, a little over a C plus average. A lot of those kids get lost in the shuffle in terms they don't go to higher education. I was one of those kids. I had my favorite classes in high school and I did really well, and the other ones I just kind of let slide. I had a community college that helped launch my college career and got me. And I think launch is an opportunity for some of those marginal students that may not get into a career field to have an opportunity to get into a career field and find something beneficial. And a lot of times those aren't 4-year degrees. Those are 2-year degrees. The jobs that we have at Simplot in our factories, I mean, we have modern factories and you need to know how to run a modern factory, but you don't need a 4-year degree for that. You can have 2 years degrees and you can have a job that, quite frankly, pays more than a lot of our employees that have 4-year degrees. So I think it's opening up incredible opportunities and giving a vital pipeline of employees for businesses in Idaho moving forward.
For the sake of time, I'm not going to follow up about the community college, high school questions I'd probably otherwise like to ask you. But
No, I'll tell you that sometimes offline. But it was a bit of a journey. But I will say I'm a huge fan of community colleges. They help people turn their lives around.
that's awesome. Stephanie, this isn't really on our script, but it goes along with the questions that we've been talking about. Tell us what you found as far as workforce and being able to attract the people you need to grow your business and to staff your business at the current levels of clientele that you have.
That has been like a dynamic shifting thing. Before COVID, we have house cleaners, we're blue collar workers. We had people that were with us for a decade plus. And these folks, maybe a mom and a daughter or, a cousin, they all worked for us. It was this community. After COVID, that totally changed. And now we've got this more transient workforce. And it's just been a real challenge, I think, from a business owner's perspective to figure out how to attract people. And we try to create benefit programs that really serve the needs of our people rather than doing kind of a top-down approach. But my goodness, healthcare, all of those things just become very complex. So.
And it's really hard to raise your prices fast enough to keep up with the increasing the pressure on wages. And
that is very true. And in fact, we did a price increase, less than a year ago, and we lost many customers over a $3 price increase. I think people are so done with inflation, and I learned, maybe don't call it out or explain it or whatever, but yeah, it is a very challenging environment.
And Corey, a similar question. This is maybe off script a little bit, but workforce related. We know that the healthcare system post-COVID lost a tremendous amount of people, especially nurses, and our healthcare systems nationwide went into a crisis mode in finding qualified people. Tell us what the status of that is now in 2025, and how has the industry, and especially Trinity and St. Al's, adapted to that?
Yeah, so workforce rapidly became kind of our number one concern. And, we became very heavily reliant on agency travel nurses, which the cost for that was just easily 3 times the cost of an employed nurse. And so our health system across the country, as kind of an intermediate step, developed its own travel nurse agency, so brought that price point down, but they could move nurses around the country where they were needed the most. And now we have weaned ourselves and kind of grown our employed workforce back to the levels that we need or close to it. I mean, there's still tremendous need for nurses, but I would say also nurses in specific specialties and docs and whatnot. But part of the strategy has been, you know, very strong partnerships with our education partners. And so we were already, helping to fund the nursing programs and other health occupation programs at Boise State, CWI, really all of the four-year institutions and also community colleges. And then we even started growing our own, kind of developing our own track. So within CWI, developed a special nursing specialty track. And then, in Nampa, we just are starting a family medicine residency for docs there. And so we are kind of growing our own medical, our medical workforce by partnering, but by saying, we can't rely on others to solve this problem for us. We'll support them, but we're also going to develop our own programs. We are also doing, we've always had, I benefited myself from tuition reimbursement to go on for a higher degree. I know they do that with nurses to get them advanced, that sort of thing. And now we're going into the loan repayment space. And so we really just kind of have to throw every strategy out there to recruit the workforce that we need, because we're the most rapidly growing area in the country. So it's not just that we lost some people, nurses that decided to go be a realtor because COVID was seeing 8 patients die in a day just became too exhausting and defeating for them. And so they went to do something else. And so we're backfilling them, but we're also trying to accommodate for all the growth.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate you mentioning the residency program in Napa. My law firm had the opportunity to be counsel for ICOM in setting up that program. That's been a really worthwhile project that we've tremendously enjoyed. Let's talk. We've covered the growth issues in Idaho that have caused pain points. There are 3 main ones: housing, we haven't talked about extensively, workforce, and then transportation. And we're not going to really focus on transportation today, but a number of the things that we're trying to do here in Idaho are being affected by federal legislation and things that are going on in Washington right now. Very fluid situation in Washington. Let's talk about, let's start with Ken, what things that are happening federally that are causing you and others at Simplot to lie awake at night.
Well, obviously, I think the big issue is tariffs. The whole tariff issue is a little crazy right now. I think all businesses are trying to figure that out. And I don't want to get too political, but President Trump is trying to defy history with his all-out tariff war. And there's the argument that short-term pain gets some long-term gain. I don't know if I completely buy that, but so we're all we're dealing with that. And then states are also starting to follow suit, whether it's the MAHA movement. They're doing things in the state to address that. We've got a DOGE effort here in Idaho now to root out even more waste. I guess they might find some, but I have to say Idaho's pretty good at already rooting out waste. The governor's done a really good job in reducing regulations and such. So I think they're probably not going to find too much, but I hate they might be forced to find some things just to make it work. There are also things on the state level that occasionally, I'll give you one kind of a fun example that happened this last session. There are things that should be done on the federal level and that just make more sense. When state level people try to do it, it just becomes bureaucratic, difficult to manage. And one of them is labeling. So we're a food company. And several years ago, we did have a GMO product, and there was efforts across states to do, state level GMO labeling. We worked really hard on the federal level on the state levels to stop that, and let's just do a federal level. That makes the most sense. People producing products need to have one consistent label. It's just costly and ineffective to have a bunch of different labels. Well, you may recall the bill that came out during this session about fake meat. There was a certain representative from North Idaho that wanted to introduce a bill that would say that you can't label fake meat as meat. Okay, we agree with that as a company, but we also don't think we should have state level bills. So here's an instance that we went to this legislator and suggested, let's not do a state level bill. Let's do a resolution calling on the federal government to do a federal bill to identify if it's real meat or fake meat. Seems like an easy thing to do. We even wrote the resolution for her, offered up our expertise that we have in D.C. and contacts we have to potentially make it happen. The Trump administration, I think, would be very amicable to this. But that effort was ignored, and they introduced the bill despite our efforts to try to help them to do something on a broader scale. So we killed the bill. We killed the bill, and we took a lot of heat for that. And all of a sudden, there was this grand conspiracy theory that some Simplot's in on the fake meat side or what have you. But those type of things, it happens on a all too often basis. But feds are good at some things. There's certain Idahoans that don't want to admit that, but feds are good at things, and labeling was one of them. You get a good traditional label. There's a lot of other things, but I won't take any more of that.
Reminds me of the last time I bought a lawnmower. It said if there was a label on it that said, if you live in the state of California, be warned that this lawnmower can cause cancer.
Only in California.
Yeah. Bobby Joe, we have lots of chamber nonprofit members and many that have considerable anxiety about things that are happening on the federal level. Again, I'm off script, but I trust that you can answer anything I can throw at you.
I know I was looking at you like, where are you going with this, Tom?
Tell us about how the nonprofit community is reacting to some of the things they're seeing.
Yeah, I think we're hearing from a lot of our membership, right? I mean, from a business perspective, there's just a lot of uncertainty right now. Business likes certainty. They like predictability. There's just not a lot of that right now as things are very fluid and changing. Also from a federal level, we're seeing impacts from our members when it comes to the freezing of federal grants. A lot of that is directly impacting nonprofits. And so it's interesting to see how that has been impacting and the challenges that it's facing for the nonprofits and also other members, right? That if it could be engineering or it could be marketing, that, they are tied directly to an infrastructure grant that has been frozen, or they have a contract for a government program that has been frozen. And so we are starting to see some impacts of those federal dollars being froze for the grants, and in particular for the nonprofits. And so hopeful that, again, that will all be worked out and we can find ways to continue with some of these programs. But I do know it's a challenge for our nonprofits. And again, a lot of just uncertainty, right? What's next and what's going to happen. I do think one thing, too, on the federal level that we're watching from a chamber perspective is the 2017 tax cuts on the federal level have expired. And so, really interested to see the renewal of those and the process of that. I think Idaho, it's an interesting perspective to have Senator Crapo where he is on a powerful committee for those. But those do have impacts if some of those do not get extended or renewed. So from a federal level, that's something that we're really engaged in and watching as a chamber.
So, Stephanie, you've had an opportunity to testify before the U.S. Senate. Tell us what you learned from that about the current state of our politics, both nationwide and here in Idaho.
Yeah, thank you. I want to, in context of that, just bring up from a small business perspective, what we are most concerned about on the federal level is the sunset of the small business deduction, which was part of Trump's 2017 tax plan. And basically what it would mean for small businesses like us, and I think there's 30 million of us across the U.S., that we could wake up in January and see a 20% increase to our bottom line. So think about the person that cuts your hair, the restaurant where you go and eat. These folks would be paying significantly more. So I had the honor of going to D.C. Last July and to testify in front of a joint Senate committee about the small business deduction. And I was able to tell the story about our house cleaners and our company and how we're able to take that. What happens when you have tax savings, and most businesses do that because we've got to stay competitive. We poured that money back into our people. And so we were able to use that savings and promote a house cleaner to an office job. This may sound like very, not very meaningful to those of you. I mean, we're all probably 4-year degrees plus, but these are folks that are, maybe graduated from high school. And so to be able to take a house cleaner and train her and get her to start to answer phones, do our marketing for us, it really changed the trajectory of not only her life, but of our family's life. So it's significant. Just one last thing, what I noticed when I testified, I was actually blown away, was that our stories matter. And it's really important for us to tell our stories, our business stories, our personal stories, both to our congressional representatives, but also to our state legislators, because they're so inundated by, 10 miles of tax, just of all the things that are surrounding them. And they often get shielded from you and from what's important to you. And I was blown away by how they really want to hear what's going on in our lives. And across the aisle, in fact, Senator Crapo invited me, and so the Democrats were all, but as they started to talk about the house cleaners and our house cleaning business, it's like it brought people across the aisle together. So anyway, it's a great experience.
Excellent. Corey, impact of federal doings on the healthcare industry?
So I think the big one for us right now is Medicaid and Medicare, risk of major cuts. There's a lot of talking past each other right now about the impact of some of the proposals. Really what Congress is working with right now are frameworks and numbers. They're not yet down into the nitty-gritty of how they're going to reach those budget targets. But where they have assigned those cuts to, the committees specifically that they have assigned those cuts to, kind of telegraph to you where the cuts are going to come from. And $880 billion in cuts was assigned to House Energy and Commerce Committee, which the main thing they oversee is Medicaid and Medicare. And so that's where the healthcare industry says, whoa, there's a big risk here of cut to Medicaid. The president, comes out and says, don't worry, we're not going to cut, Medicaid. We're going to cherish Medicaid. And then, I think we heard Senator Crapo when he was here in town reiterate, we're not going to touch Medicaid, but he said benefits to people who are on Medicaid. But the financing behind, how the providers get reimbursed and that sort of thing, there could be numbers assigned to something, and then it's up to the states to make those cuts happen. And so I think it's a really nuanced message and frustrating for people who are talking to members of Congress who are saying, we're not cutting Medicaid. But we can kind of see the writing on the wall that risk is coming. I also think another dynamic with the federal government right now is in the past, and how it's affecting our state legislature, is in the past, some of the really further right proposals that we would be able to say the feds will never let you do that. It's in regulation or it's in law that you can't do that. We now have a federal administration that's more willing to say, yeah, you can do that. And so that's the case with some of these Medicaid expansion waivers, where we know it goes against the guidance of those specific waivers to do what they want to do, but they've got faith that the federal government is going to be more permissive of some of those ideas. And so that's just a dynamic that things that we thought were clear before are suddenly a little murky.
So I think all these comments have been great, and I thank you guys so much for your perspective. I want to end with one last question. I want each of you, I'm going to start with Stephanie here and move to my left. I want you to each take a minute and a half and tell us from your perspective how the face of the Idaho legislature has changed over time. We've gone from a sense 20 years ago of some certainty in the deliberative process and an ability to be heard, to other people would say today a lot of that is lost. Tell us how our legislature has evolved in response to national and statewide trends towards more polarization and some of the things we're seeing in our political climate. So Stephanie, have at it.
So I'm not an expert with like these guys, but I'm a small business owner. So and I'm a fourth generation Idahoan. So long line of business owners in my family. And growing up here, I have seen Idaho go through these phases of kind of like pretty drastic or dramatic, I don't know, things that get us in the national news. But I think what I keep going back to is that we are really fortunate to live in this state of low regulation and taxes and so forth. And we have a citizen legislature. And I often forget that we're one of only, like, I think it's 10 states that has a part-time legislature. So these folks that come here are not full-time employees. They are farmers, they're professionals, they're business owners, and they come here for 3 months, and then they go back to their regular job. So for many years, we had a real stable, group. But truly, that citizen legislature reflects the dynamics of the world that we live in. And right now, we're living in a very, kind of chaotic, um, changing environment, and our legislature affects that. But from a business perspective, truly, and a lot of the social issues, things that this legislature was dealing with, I really personally do not agree with. But when I look at it from a business perspective, it was more of the same things that, I tried to leave Idaho for 2 years and I came back. I missed it. And so I do feel like this legislature, bottom line, kind of upheld those basic values that we hold so dear.
Ken.
I'll add, I'll take a positive tack to this. It has changed dramatically. I mean, if you look at the makeup of the legislature, but I'll say business has probably got a little complacent. I mean, for years, we enjoyed the luxury of having a legislature that pretty much worked in lockstep with business and industry. IACI, for example, I mean, I hate to say it, there was a time where you could go over there and say, here's what we want, and the legislature would say, okay, we're going to give that to you. That's changed. And if you look at the makeup of the legislature, that's in a lot of ways, a lot of new people coming in, from out of state that don't, for example, don't know who Simplot is. I mean, they don't know Simplot is. They don't know who Micron is, for that matter. They haven't been here long enough. They have certain different levels of experience. They bring some personal biases in. But so it's changing the makeup. So it's put up on businesses. We have to kind of quit being complacent and try to be more aggressive in educating those legislators. It doesn't always work. There are some legislators over there that will not even talk to lobbyists and avoid them, but some will. So we can kind of find some places where we can wins with them, find places where we can find some common ground. That's a work in progress. It's going to take quite a bit of time going forward. Just give you a little perspective. If IACI does a scorecards are a big thing now on legislators. You can find them. Idaho Freedom Foundation does their scorecard. IACI does a scorecard now, and we basically do a scorecard based on how legislators vote on business things that are important to us. I think this session, 58.8% of the legislators voted on our agenda, so almost half the legislature didn't. I mean, 5 years ago that would have been probably 80%. That's how dramatically it's changed, but I think that's put the onus on us to be more proactive, set aside our own personal biases. I agree there are some social things and some of the crazy bills out there that drive me nuts, but you got to set those biases aside and just reach out and talk to them, because this is what we have going forward. But to Stephanie's point, I mean, we're still a great place to do business. And at the end of the day, we did pretty good this legislative session, all things considered, but it took a lot of work, and that's going to continue going forward. So we can bash the crazies, but we've got to also figure out a way to work with them. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think we all need to remember that these people are elected by their constituents, so they represent the state. And, I think when we look from a business perspective, there were things that didn't happen that we wish would have, but we got income and corporate tax relief. We got investments in Idaho Launch, urban renewal reform, childcare investments. So there were some really great things from a business perspective that did happen this session. And I think it's all about partnerships and relationships and telling stories. And so I think it's an opportunity. There's a lot of new people that we got to get out there and meet with, tell our stories and build those relationships. And so I think it's an opportunity, and I think we're all up for the challenge.
Yeah, I would note a couple of significant dynamics. I think one is just the significant increase in out-of-state interest money that is driving the elections. That is really taking a toll. And then, like we were talking about, the bill mill, dynamic. The second thing is just that I would note that a number of the legislators are part of the in-migration we've been experiencing, the growth in Idaho, and I would say it's in-migration with a cause. people who are coming here from another state and they fled that state because they disagreed with their policies or taxes or whatever. And so they have an axe to grind, and they came here because we're more like what they want to see, but maybe they want to have us move even further. And then the last thing that I'll point out is just there seems to be a shift from focusing on how legislation benefits the common good versus me as an individual, my rights. And I really think that shifted during COVID. It became about me. Government should be about protecting my rights and stay out of everything else. And I think many of us, and for St. Alphonsus being part of a faith-based ministry, government, we believe government should be about benefiting the common good. And so those two things kind of butt up against each other as to what we really think the role of government should be.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. We're now going to open the panel to questions. So whoever would like to ask questions, we've reserved some time for that. Yes.
My question is I'm hearing a lot about AI and AI in business, and especially the healthcare, diagnostics. I believe the program's Amy, and it's really good. My question for you is, as an industry with AI, what are you doing to protect privacy, and what kind of legislation do you see coming down the pipe?
You want me to take that?
Please.
Yeah, so I think AI is an area where that field is advancing much faster than policy is. And I think it won't be long before we see more AI legislation coming forward. I know, I cover Oregon and Idaho and, talk about two very opposite politically states. But in Oregon, there is legislation this year to require that nothing can call itself a nurse unless they are a human nurse, because there's now, if you're using a chat bot, and they might make themselves sound like if you're online, you go to somebody's website or whatever, sometimes a little chat pops up and it's got a name associated with it, and you think you're talking to a person and you might not be. So, I think there's some of that. You can't impersonate a nurse unless, you need to have those credentials. I think in healthcare, AI is being used in some very worthwhile ways that don't really get into the privacy space, but I think that that's definitely an area of policy that we've got to stay ahead of, because there are some definite risks there.
And I'll just add to that. I advise healthcare providers on AI issues. And the biggest part of that is to make sure you never enter into an arrangement with an AI vendor who can't ensure the privacy of the protected health information that might be subject to the AI. So they have to have all this HIPAA compliant standard safeguards that if you're a physician and using AI to assist in dictating a note, summarizing a patient visit, that all has to be stored in a way that has all the safeguards that are inherent in the longstanding HIPAA security safeguards. So there's some good protections in place from a contract standpoint and from a federal standpoint under HIPAA that other regulations will catch up at some point. I think we had a question over here.
I'm with the Lee Pesky Learning Center, and we provide professional development for early childhood educators across the state. And Wood River Valley calls their shortage actually the desert. It's a desert issue. And we find that across the state that there's inadequate childcare. But we also find, even in my own organization, because we're a nonprofit and the pay is low, my own employees are struggling to pay for childcare. So I'm really curious to hear, Ken, about what that $45 million appropriation is for.
Well, I think some of it's going to go toward, obviously opening up more slots, helping with salaries for employees. If I understand it correctly, there's not money in there for building new facilities, which is unfortunate. I mean, we've advocated for a long time. There was a bunch of COVID money that we could have gotten, but we didn't, that would have led to building new facilities. So that's not in there, but it will hopefully increase salaries, maybe open up some more slots, help work with companies that want to start their own childcare operations. That will help with that as well. You know, we haven't touched on the school choice bill that came forward. The one that did pass, there was another one out there that had a provision in it that would have allowed for some funding for early childhood education, which from a business perspective, that's one we would have supported because that too would have helped with the child care issue. And we also think that, you know, the earlier you start educating a child, the better outcomes are going to be. But that didn't make it through. But it's, to your point, it's probably a drop in the bucket, unfortunately, but it's a start. And, but you're right, child care is probably one of the biggest limiting factors really with employees across the board. I mean, it's inexpensive. It's not inexpensive. It's expensive. It's not always accessible. And the childcare people that do childcare have nothing but great respect to take care of children. My sister has worked in childcare for 30 plus years, and they don't make nearly enough money. They really don't, which is always, there's an irony that, you know, we hire people to look after our children, and they're some of the lowest paid. So we need to figure out how to address that. But this is a start, but there's a lot more we need to do. I don't know if anyone else has.
I would also add that there was legislation that passed that was pretty divisive that deregulates childcare, and it sort of preempts some of the municipalities that, like Boise, who has their own childcare regulations and ratios and things like that. The intent of that is good because it was about lowering the barriers for people that want to get into and offer childcare services. But on the child safety side, there definitely were some concerns that were raised, and just from, you know, the local control element of, if you as a community decide that you want to raise the bar on something, should you be able to do that?
And I will add, that was one of those bills that was delivered. It's an outside group that introduced those bills. In Montana, my sister works in Montana, and they had a similar bill. It's actually not similar, exact bill that ran in Montana. It did not pass, but to Corey's point, there's a lot of challenges with that bill. So.
Anyone else want to add to that question? I'm going to just comment on your use of the term desert. I have a healthcare client, Lost Rivers Medical Center, that's actually in a desert, one of the smallest hospitals in the U.S. And there was some COVID money available, and they applied for it, and they built a new new child care facility on their campus for their employees and for others in the community that need child care. And I've looked at that and thought, wow, what a wonderful thing, a blessing that's been to that community. Yes.
Good morning, panel. Carrick with CSHQA Architects. I am one of these people that are about to move to this fine state and city. I'm looking forward to it, from Denver. Tied to the A&E industry, what kind of legislation did you see, or monies, or important bills that might really affect our space in the marketplace?
I'm a part-time construction lawyer. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. I can't think of anything major this session that affected either the A&E community or the construction community. Bobby Joe?
I guess just one thing to add. I mean, there was additional $20 million additional dollars that went through the TECUM fund, which is the transportation fund that helps build out large-scale transportation projects. Highway 16 has been a benefit of that. So that would be a benefit, a positive, additional money into that program, which is going to allow us to do even more of those large-scale programs throughout the state. So I'd say that from a positive perspective.
And the funding for schools from the 2024 legislative session is increasing the construction of schools in all sorts of different areas. So from a funding perspective, I agree. I was viewing your question more from a licensing or a regulatory perspective, and there's about every 5-10 years we get a bill that affects the construction industry. I'm the healthcare side of my practice. Something changes every day. Construction, pretty consistent. So other questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll be done a few minutes early. Thank you so much for being here today. I'll turn the time. Who do I turn the time back to? Somebody.
So we can take me. Well, Sylvia's going to turn up. Such a great dynamic. Thank you, Tom. Thank you to the panelists again. And thank you for allowing us to look through your lens on these issues. The breakfast series report will be in the April 25th edition of the Idaho Business Review. Coincidentally, and thank you, Corey, for bringing up the NAMPA residency program. Mark Lutz, our editor, has a story on that. So if you'd like to learn more about that and read more in depth, that story will also be in the the April 25th edition of the Idaho Business Review. That same day, the recording from today will be on our website, so feel free to rewatch it or share it with those that you think will find this interesting. Thank you again to our breakfast series presenting sponsor, Holly Troxel, and our supporting sponsors, Bank of America and the Grove Hotel. A special thanks to Boise Center for hosting us today and the Better Business Bureau for being our videographer. Josiah Hansen is sales manager for the Better Business Bureau, and he is here. Josiah, you want to raise your hand? Hello. He's here to assist you if you have any questions and are interested in getting your business accredited with the Better Business Bureau. Please see Josiah. Coming up, we've got on your program, there are upcoming breakfast series sessions for the rest of the year, June, August, and October. So feel free to take a peek at those. And if those topics interest you, which there's always interesting comments and information that comes from them, even if they're not something that's really in your industry. They're all very fascinating, very interesting, and Mark does a great job with lining up an excellent panel for those. Coming up, we have our Top Companies in Treasure Valley event on May 22nd, followed by the 15th Annual CEO of Influence Awards program. We hope you can join us in recognizing companies that create a positive work culture and stay to honor the 21 CEOs that we'll be recognizing that evening. This year, we'll be giving special recognition to Simplot Company CEO Garrett Lofto. He has been selected as the Link of Distinction Award recipient, so really proud to honor him. He does great work in the community. And that will all be happening on May 22nd. And then on June 10th, we'll be recognizing the Accomplished Under 40 and Icon honorees at the annual awards dinner right here at Boise Center. And we hope you'll join us for that. So we got a few things that we've been working on. So if you would like information about the 2025 Breakfast Series or other Idaho Business Review events or programs, please visit our website at idahobusinessreview.com. With that, I want to thank you for being here. Thank you again to the panelists. Tom, great to have you moderating today's panel discussion. And with that, I will wish you all a very good day. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Holidays.